And we're now joined in studio by international affairs analyst Dan Perry. Good evening. Good to see you. So we heard the State of the Union. We heard Biden speak. We know that right now there is a pier of sorts being built. That is something that's been tossed around for several years. Is this a good temporary option?
I think any option that gets humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in some controlled situation that maybe aims to prevent Hamas from taking over that aid is a good option. But realistically, what we're looking at here is a profound political situation in the U.S. There are two Bidens. One Biden really is a Zionist who supports Israel's war aims, which I think are eminently defensible. The other is a humanist who laments the tremendous cost on the civilian population in Gaza, which I think, by the way, decent Israelis should as well. And he's trying to play both sides. Now, there is also a dual political need for Biden. State of the Union address was basically the opening gambit in his campaign. Now, the Gaza war has become a wedge issue for the Democratic Party, where the progressives and the youth and the Muslims in Michigan, mainly, on one hand, are arrayed against the Jews and the centrists on the other, for example, in Pennsylvania, my own home state. This is a real problem for Biden. He cannot lose either Michigan or Pennsylvania and hope to win the election. So he's trying to straddle both sides of this divide to show support for Israel, which, by the way, polls show most Americans really do still feel, while at the same time projecting that he understands that there is a need to appease that part of public opinion, and indeed that part of humanity.
And we heard, we heard from Ronan Yutra, who I know, who specifically, who I've interviewed a lot, who's met with the president. He says the president cried with us, and Absolutely. He really does feel the pain of what the families are going through. Now, we also heard reports in Israeli media, it has not been confirmed, that some of the families of 12 hostages have been given a proof of life. They've been fighting for this for months and haven't been able to get it. So again, this is a report, but could this potentially mean that maybe we could get the beginnings of a last-minute reprieve and hostage deal for Ramadan?
It helps, but the 12 families, the proof of life, it's more than 12 hostages, but it's roughly 10% of the hostages that we know are in Gaza, so it's so paltry. And the fact that Hamas continues to hold out on basic information is just yet more evidence of the utter inhumanity of what Israel is dealing with. I wish I could be more optimistic about a deal anytime soon, but the basic calculus remains the same. Hamas probably won't give up all the hostages without Israel essentially conceding the war, pulling out and ending the war, leaving Hamas in power. And I don't think Israel can do that. I really don't.
Well, Israel said that from the very beginning.
So all you have that really seems logically possible is a temporary ceasefire for partial hostage release, and yet that isn't what we hear is on the table. And we've been talking a lot about Ramadan and the presumption that a decent government of Gaza might want Ramadan to be peaceful, but we do not have that type of government in Gaza. And it's pretty clear to me that Hamas does not feel pressure about a deadline next week, but rather would prefer for the war to continue during Ramadan in hopes that that will inflame the situation in Jerusalem and Israel in a region. That is what we're dealing with.
One last thing before we're going to go to a live guest is let's talk about at least security. The UN Security Council at least going to hold an emergency session on this report, which made headlines this week, even though it took 4 months to send somebody even here to do the investigation. What can that accomplish, if anything?
I mean, I don't know what it can. You won't have a U.S. veto for once, so the UN Security Council may finally approve a resolution. But realistically, I think the best thing the world can do, the UN Security Council, but also the Arab League and almost any international group, is to put maximal pressure in every way the pressure can exist on Hamas to fork over the hostages and to surrender and perhaps accept an exile deal. I mean, if the UN can somehow agree on a resolution calling for that and do it in concert perhaps with the EU, the Arab League, and even NATO, that might have some suasion on the likes of Qatar to put pressure on Hamas. The only way I can see progress happening in coming weeks is for Hamas to feel the squeeze monumentally. And probably at the end of the day, all these international groupings translate into some sort of suasion on Qatar. that has to make the point to Hamas.
So time will tell, and they're supposed to have that emergency session on Monday. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back in a moment with you. Now we have another interview from New York. Columbia University Business School Professor Shai Davidai has had enough. He announced on Twitter that the Columbia University has opened an investigation into his advocacy for Jewish and Israeli students, faculty, and staff. And this investigation is a clear act of retaliation and an attempt to silence me. Shai joins us live now. Thank you for being here, and good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
You're very brave, and we've all been following these stories up close and personal, seeing what's happened on these college campuses around the country. Even in October, when we first started hearing from some of the students who spoke up in these press conferences, has the anti-Semitism still continued even 5 months later on campus?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question that I get all the time. And the answer is it's not only that it's continued, it's become worse. It's become worse and worse, right? So things that would have shocked us in the beginning of October, right? The rhetoric of from the river to the sea, we don't want two states, we want all of 48, all of those things, globalized intifada, are now something that has become normalized, that people are just desensitized. And the things we're hearing now, for example, at Columbia's campus, are things like death to the Zionist state.
I found myself wondering, what do you think is the reason for this? I do distinguish between anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism, and I don't discount the importance of anti-Israelism. That itself is a profound thing. Why is it happening? Are they kowtowing to progressive students? Is this something that the university is promoting? Why are they so confused about the fact that to have sympathy for the Palestinian plight and national cause, as I strongly suspect you do, is really not the same thing as supporting Hamas in any way? Why would they even flirt with supporting Hamas? Why is it happening?
So first of all, I've spent 4 months thinking that they were confused. And for the past month, I think that they're not confused. They refuse to take action. There are many different reasons for this. And if you follow my actions on social media, you will see we have professors that are not academics, they're ideologues. They indoctrinate the students. They have gone on record saying that they don't apologize for Hamas, they support Hamas.
Wow.
We have student organizations that have been acting with complete impunity.
I went to UPenn. These things were never issues. It's unbelievable how much, I won't age myself, things have changed where professors have to be afraid of students. I remember being a student, and I had so much respect for the professors. And
look, these universities used to be bastions of liberalism, and now they're bastions of progressivism. I'm actually an alumnus of both Penn and Columbia, and I feel shame right now because of what's happening. It really is unbelievable. And I would like these universities to have some moral clarity. Please, Professor Levitin.
I'll tell you, everything boils down. So I would say they're not bastions of progressivism, they're bastions of illiberalism, right? They've gone so extreme, right? But I will tell you, everything boils down to this rhetoric of powerful and powerless, right? And the student organizations, even though they act in mobs of thousands of people, they perceive themselves as victims, they perceive themselves as the powerless, and then a single vocal Jewish professor speaking up is perceived as the powerful. Now, I don't know about you, but when I started university, I was focused on just learning and making sure that I do good in my classes, do well in my classes. Well, I guess if you see your professor at a pro-Hamas rally, then you think I'll do really good at my class, I'll do really well in my class if I hold a bullhorn and shout in Arabic during this pro-Hamas rally.
Crazy. We have 1 more minute. Last thoughts. We could go on like this forever because this is just it's mind-boggling still.
Look,
even all the reporting on it, it's mind-boggling. This is happening.
Spectacular moral failure. The universities should treat support for Hamas as they would treat support for the Nazis or for the restoration of slavery, and that they're not doing it really is disgraceful. But I think for a little bit of perspective, we should know recent polls have showed 70 to 80% of Americans do support Israel. The minority that doesn't is very loud, very vocal, and overrepresented dangerously with the youth. And of course on these elite campuses, which we bemoan. But in general, America hasn't yet fully lost its bearings on this issue.
Well, hopefully the ship could be steered before it's too late. Thank you both very much, and keep fighting the good fight. And Dan, thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.